Dr. Rajendra Varaprasad is the rheumatologist. I welcome him. Before I,
Good afternoon, sir.
I asked him to speak briefly. I'll mention about the academic his brilliancy. He did his MBBS from Gandhi Medical College, Hyderabad, and then his MD from Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences, and DM also from Nizam Institute of Medical Sciences. And he served there as a rheumatologist, as an assistant professor, subsequently as associate professor. Then he had a fellowship in University College of London, and presently is working as a rheumatologist in Yashoda Hospital, Somajiguda, from 2017 onwards. His the activities at national level are Vice President of Rheumatology Association, Hyderabad chapter, is an assistant editor for the Indian Journal of Rheumatology, is editor for SLD monograph, and associate editor of APICP myositis monographs, and is also organizer secretary for the national conference, including international faculty, SLD Symposium 2016, and he's got a membership in Indian Rheumatology Association, and he's got, of course, papers published in national and international journals. And then his area of interest is in rheumatology, emergencies, and SAE, myositis. So with this brief introduction of Dr. Varaprasad, I request you to kindly pardon us for not able to get the number. But however, as our colleague has definitely put it, it will be recorded and then it will also be, forwarded to the people who require it. So I request Dr. Varaprasad, please start with your lecture on approach to polyarthritis. Polyarthritis, those were the days when we had only just rheumatoid arthritis or rheumatic arthritis, nothing more than that during our student. Subsequently, there is vast expansion, and then it has gone to the higher extent, higher levels, and then polyarthritis is a topic that requires a good approach, which I think Dr. Varaprasad will definitely give us an approach for this, and then that will make the students easy to digest. I request Dr. Varaprasad to go ahead with this topic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Balraj, sir, for the kind introduction and especially giving this opportunity to talk in this prestigious academic forum. Uh, I don't mind what number of the students, sir. One small correction, I am assistant editor for IJRs, Indian Journal of Rheumatology.
Oh, sorry, sir. Okay.
Anyway, sir, thank you very much, sir, for inviting me. Today, I wanted to talk about approach to polyarthritis. This is a very important topic because um, we come across patients coming with joint pains or whatever, multiple pains, and we don't know whether it is arthritis or it's just polyarthralgia or it is just myalgia or fibromyalgia. There are many differential diagnoses. So we don't have a direct. This approach will help us to have a direction about how to evaluate, how to take history of this patient and how to evaluate further. Because blindly doing tests will not help in rheumatology, especially in case of joint pains. With that brief uh, introduction, I will start my talk. There are at least documented 100 different types of arthritis, but in practice, most of the times we see around 20 different types of arthritis which we can recognize, and the rest of the arthritis are very rare and we may not see them. So out of those 20 also, there are very few which we come across in almost as a rheumatologist or a physician, we come across at least once in a day. Like most common are the rheumatoid arthritis, which is very common. The next one is the spondyloarthritis, where predominantly there is involvement of axial skeleton along with extremities, involvement of extremities, and then gout, osteoarthritis, and all the different types of arthritis we come across in the connective tissue diseases. So 80 to 90% of any arthritis usually we are these, and the rest of the all miscellaneous or and rare type of arthritis are on the 10% of the cases. So a patient demographic like age, sex, and the from where the patient comes, that will help a lot uh, to have a preliminary assessment about the patient. Like if patient is a child less than 16 years, so if the cause of pains are not known, this is that we call it as juvenile idiopathic arthritis. So in children, the arthralgias are most common due to some infections, simple infections, or juvenile idiopathic arthritis, or rarely connective diseases and reactive arthritis can also be seen in children. And in adults, most common arthritis, as already told, it is rheumatoid arthritis or all the spondyloarthritis variant. There are 4 to 5 types of SPS based on different classification. All this, these are common in adulthood, and osteoarthritis, as we all know, seen in above 50 years or 60 years, depending upon the predisposing conditions. Coming to gender, most of the inflammatory arthritis where or connective tissue diseases are common in females. So SLE, you can see the ratio of females to male is 9:7. Rheumatoid arthritis, the ratio is around 3 to 4 to 1. Fibromyalgia is also significantly high in females. And other arthritis like spondyloarthritis or vasculitis, the gender is there is no one gender predisposition. And gout is one peculiar thing where it is common in males, especially after puberty around young males, 20s, 30 years of age. And in females, it is very uncommon and only seen after menopause, because estrogen helps in excreting uric acid. So uh, in females, the gout before 50 years is very highly unlikely unless there is a genetic predisposition where we can have a family history of uric acid stones or kidney disease in the family. So coming to history and the clinical examination, as I said, that history and clinical history forms a key, plays a key role in assessment of the patient and diagnosing this patient. So I always think if someone comes with a pain of a limb, the patient may be very non-specific sometimes. Some patients were very observant; they can pinpoint to the arthritis, this particular joint, this the hands or elbows. They can point it out. But some patients just be with because of chronic pains. They may just say diffuse pain, both all over the body. Sometimes people will say the whole body is aching, or both upper limbs or both lower limbs are widespread pains. So this picture, I think we should be able to tell roughly from where the pain is arising. Like the causes of pain in a limb per se, if we take, it could be from the skin. Like a classic example is a preherpetic pain or a subcutaneous tissue, like all the different types of panniculitis or vasculitis, which can cause panniculitis. And going down, it can be due to muscle pains, myalgias or myositis. It could be fasciitis, enthesitis. In case of enthesitis, enthesis are the ligaments or muscle attachments of tendons where they attach to the bone. So the inflammation of this is called enthesitis or bursitis, myalgias and arthralgias, and arthritis is one is the focus of today's talk. And sometimes it could be just osteitis, inflammatory or non-inflammatory, discitis in case of spine, and we also have to keep an open mind. It could be vascular pain like ischemic pain or a DVT pain, and neuropathic pain, which is very severe kind of pain which they do not respond to NSAIDs, and fibromyalgia where there is truly widespread pain across the body. So all this we have to keep an open mind to where the pain is arising from. So once we are sure that it could be more likely due to joint pain from the history, and if patient is able to tell or show, then these 8 important things we have to note in our detailed history. We have to identify whether the arthritis joint pain is an inflammatory in nature or non-inflammatory in nature. How the onset and what is the onset and duration, the number of the joints affected is one joint or multiple joints, and the symmetry of the involvement, and the distribution of the joints, the pattern of the joint, whether axial or peripheral, and what is the course of the pains, like additive, migratory, intermittent. I'm going to elaborate on this. That is why I'm going fast on this slide. And extra-articular symptoms associated with arthritis. Like it could be some rash, or it could be a CVA. So all the associated symptoms. Rash, or it could be a CVA. And all the associated symptoms. So coming to yeah. Okay, thank you. So coming to the first point which I mentioned, whether the pain is due to an inflammatory kind of pain or a non-inflammatory kind of pain. So these are the differences. Here you can see joint pain and swelling can be seen in both inflammatory and non-inflammatory types of pains. But if there is a redness of the joint, if there is stiffness of the early morning stiffness lasting more than 1 hour, or if the pains are associated with fatigue, and if it is rapidly progressive and causing limitation of the movement, if there is associated fever or a significant systemic features, these all point towards inflammatory nature of the joint pain. So we have to be careful here. So sometimes morning stiffness can be there in non-inflammatory pains like osteoarthritis, but it usually lasts less than 15 minutes or maybe at the maximum 30 minutes. There could be fever and there could be loss of function, but with experience, we'll be able to differentiate inflammatory versus non-inflammatory. Roughly, if you can remember this and if you are able to differentiate a patient complaints, it is a very good, it will be a very good start to further characterize what type of arthritis the patient is having. So these are the common examples for inflammatory types of arthritis. I'm just keeping naming them intermittently in my presentation, just so that you can remember, like viral arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, connective tissue diseases like SLE, and all the spondyloarthritis group like ankylosing spondylitis, reactive arthritis, IBD-related arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, and other miscellaneous arthritis, rheumatic fever, which is uncommon nowadays. Behçet's disease, these are some of the rare form of arthritis. Coming to non-inflammatory, predominantly it includes osteoarthritis. It could be osteoarthritis of the hand or a generalized osteoarthritis. Any trauma or any can lead to of a local injury like a ligament injury or some injury causing internal derangement of the joint mechanics that can cause osteoarthritis in the long run. Obesity, and in case of excessive aggressive exercise program, there could be chondromalacia, which could lead to osteoarthritis. And different, these are common metabolic derangements of the body like hemochromatosis, ochronosis, acromegaly. They also can cause arthritis and arthralgias of variant depending upon the severity of the involvement and the duration of the disease. So the next important thing, once we think it is inflammatory or non-inflammatory, if it is inflammatory, how is the onset and what is the duration of the arthritis? We roughly divide acute and chronic with the duration of 6 weeks. So this has a lot of bearing. Most of the acute arthritis are reversible, and most of the chronic arthritis, there is a possibility that they can go on to progress in due course. So this differentiation will help in planning the treatment and also prognosticating to whether to evaluate a patient or not, or whether, and also to prognosticate the patient. So in acute, most of the times are infection related or crystal arthropathies or post-infectious arthritis. So most common acute arthritis are acute causes of acute arthritis are viral infections like parvovirus, hepatitis, rubella, mumps. These are all Epstein-Barr virus. These are all self-limiting. Whether you treat the patient or not, the patient is going to be fine after 1 month or 6 weeks. And usually it is in viral arthritis, it is mostly the symptoms are more than signs. You may not actually say synovitis here. The other infections are bacterial infections, especially most classically described as Neisseria, where it can have multiple joints involved, but it is septic arthritis. Patient will have a lot of systemic features also because it is a bacterial infection. And the other common acute arthritis we come across non-infectious is crystal arthropathies, classically gout or CPPD disease that is called. It is calcium pyrophosphate dehydrogenase crystal disease. So gout, as we all know, it comes in episodes and usually self-limiting within a week or 10 days, even without treatment. So that is one of the classic example of non-infectious acute self-limiting arthritis. And coming to reactive arthritis, like any kind of predisposing factors like UTI or GI infections, they can cause reactive arthritis. Sometimes we may not be able to identify the cause, but patient will come with this classic symptoms of reactive arthritis, where we can see asymmetric lower limb involvement of large joints. This also is self-limiting, though most patients will require treatment to prevent morbidity of the arthritis. Coming to chronic arthritis, most of the diseases which rheumatologists or patient rheumatologist deals are the chronic arthritis. Classic examples here are rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis, all the connective tissue diseases related arthritis, spondyloarthritis, crystal arthritis, as I mentioned, CPPD, gout, and sarcoidosis, vasculitis, polyarticular JIA of children, benign hypermobile joint syndromes, and some infections also can go on for chronic arthritis like mycobacterial, fungal, and HIV sometimes can cause chronic arthritis. But usually these infectious like mycobacterial or fungal, they are usually monoarticular. That usually helps in differentiating other non-inflammatory, non-infectious arthritis. Once we after that, the next one to look up to assess is whether how many joints are involved, whether it is a single joint monoarthritis or less than 4 joints, that is oligoarthritis, or more than 4 or more than 4 joints is polyarthritis. Sorry, polyarthritis is 5 or more than 5 joints. So okay, so monoarthritis is most unless proved otherwise, any chronic monoarthritis we have to evaluate for, we have to rule out infection. As I said, tuberculosis is fairly common in our country, and the other infections are like fungal, which is rare, but in immunocompromised patient we have to look into that aspect also. And most common cause of acute monoarthritis are, as I said, gout, that is a classic example, or septic arthritis, like bacterial arthritis, which all the septic arthritis, except for the Neisseria, usually is limited to the single joint. Coming to oligoarthritis, the classic example of oligoarthritis are all the spondyloarthritis variant, that is HLA-B27 associated variants, like the psoriasis, IBD, ankylosing spondylitis, and reactive arthritis. Polyarthritis, the most classic example is rheumatoid arthritis and similar diseases. These polyarthritis are, again, we can further assess what type of polyarthritis it is. Like once we know patient is having multiple joints, then the next thing we have to assess is whether the arthritis is symmetrical or asymmetrical. So the classic example of any symmetrical arthritis is rheumatoid arthritis. And rheumatoid arthritis is very common. The incidence throughout the world is around 1%. So any patient who has a symmetric arthritis and who has a joint pains for more than 6 weeks, unless proved otherwise, we have to consider that as rheumatoid arthritis. Especially, and if it is more than 6 6 weeks is a cutoff, but if patient is coming after 6 months, say, then most likely the diagnosis would be rheumatoid arthritis unless put otherwise, because the incidence wise, it is the most common, and the presentation, symmetrical arthritis is the most common. So the other arthritis which can have a symmetric involvement is erosive osteoarthritis. So the distribution of joints is different for osteoarthritis compared to rheumatoid arthritis. I will tell in the subsequent slides. And all the viral infection related arthritis can be symmetrical, SLE, and it rarely the asymmetric are the reactive arthritis, and the spondyloarthritis group are asymmetrically involved, and gout also asymmetrically involves asymmetrically. So coming to pattern. So once we know that there is symmetry, then we have to see whether the patient has any axial involvement also, whether it is a entirely peripheral involvement of arthritis. Peripheral, I mean the extremities, the shoulders, elbows, the wrist joints, metacarpophalangeal, PIP, and DIP joints. In the lower limbs, it is knees, ankles, MTPs, intertarsal joints. These are the peripheral joints. Axial joints are the joints involving the axial skeleton. The facet joints, sacroiliac joints. So these are the hip joints. Sometimes they are included in axial involvement. So these are the and shoulders also. So whether it is axial, predominantly axial involvement, or axial or with peripheral involvement helps in differentiating. Roughly for a students, it is better to remember that any arthritis along with axial involvement, any peripheral arthritis with axial involvement usually is one or the other of the spondyloarthritis variant, like AS on the right side. You can see that it could be AS, Reiter syndrome, enteropathic arthritis, or psoriatic arthritis. And the predominantly peripheral or all on the left side panel, RASLE, viral. Psoriatis can sometimes be symmetric with only peripheral involvement. And here I would also, because we are discussing now this, regarding psoriatic arthritis. Psoriatic arthritis again has 5 different variants. So it has a classic peripheral type like rheumatoid arthritis, and it has a classic peripheral and axial involvement like ankylosing spondylitis. So that is why it has come in both sides of this classification. So here, this picture, the first picture on here, if you see, that is a classical representation nomogram of joints involved in rheumatoid arthritis. Here you can see involvement of shoulders, elbows, wrists, metacarpophalangeal joints, and proximal interphalangeal joints. The DIP joints are spared usually. And in the lower limbs, the knees and metatarsophalangeal joints. The second one is the reactive arthritis or the psoriatic arthritis. Also, we can consider this to be a representative image. Here you can see on the right hand side of this nomogram, the first digit, all the MCP, PIP, DIP are involved. That is called ray pattern of involvement, ray as a single line. So this kind of pattern is classic for psoriatic arthritis. Even in the lower limb left side, you can see the second digit, MTP and interphalangeal joint, both are involved. This is a ray pattern. And you can see sacroiliac joint involvement on the right side, not the left side. So this is asymmetric sacroiliac joint involvement with asymmetric joint involvement of the extremities and in a ray pattern. This is classical for psoriatic arthritis. Coming to the third picture, you can see the spine, whole spine here being highlighted. It is predominant axial involvement with bilateral sacroiliac joint involvement, which are marked in red, and hip joint involvement. So this is predominantly axial joint involvement, and this is classic for ankylosing spondylitis. So now it is also called spondyloarthritis. Now the terminology is different now. It is called SPA-AS type. The fourth one is the osteoarthritis. Here you can see the joints classically involved are the DIPs and PIPs, the knee joints, hips, first MTPs and first CMCs, and then the CMC joints, and cervical, neck involvement, and sternoclavicular and acromioclavicular joints. These are the and this is the distribution of osteoarthritis. So it is sometimes difficult to differentiate RA from OA and psoriatic arthritis from OA, but This will help, this distribution will help us, especially clinically and also imaging wise, we can differentiate them. So next comes is the course. What is the course of the arthritis? Whether it is migratory type, additive, or progressive. So migratory type, the classic examples are rheumatic fever, uh, where we can see asymmetric involvement of lower limbs, a fleeting type of joint pains, and gonococcal arthritis, there will be migratory type. Lyme's disease in the early stages, sarcoidosis, SLE, and endocarditis. Coming to additive pattern, rheumatoid arthritis is a classic example for additive arthritis. So the patient will initially may start having pain in the wrist and the other wrist, then the elbow. So incrementally, one of the other, all the joints can be involved over 3 months to 6 months or sometimes 1 year also. So that is called additive pattern, and usually additive pattern arthritis are all go to chronic arthritis like rheumatoid arthritis, and they have a prolonged course of disease. And then comes the intermittent type, where it is self-limiting. Like early stage of arthritis, it can be intermittent sometimes. But the classic examples, I think everyone should remember, are the palindromic rheumatism, where the patient has pains like for 3 to 6 months and subsides on its own with treatment or without treatment. And other classic example for intermittent arthritis is the gout. The pain comes, lasts for 7 days to 10 days and subsides. And other chronic arthritis, rheumatoid, psoriasis, or Rhetus, sarcoid, they classically are chronic arthritis, but initially they can present as intermittent type of arthritis. So coming to extra-articular manifestations. So here, extra-articular manifestation in cases, especially in case of connective tissue disease or vasculitis, they are very helpful in diagnosing because we can narrow down the differential diagnosis and come to a possible clinical diagnosis. So I will show you some pictures so that it will be useful. So this is a maculopapular rash erythematous. So it can be seen classically in Still's disease, but it can also be seen in drug rashes, where it's a serum sickness-like illnesses, where there is polyarthralgias and this kind of rash, and viral syndromes like EBV or where there can be rash and polyarthritis also. Urticaria, the classic example are serum sickness, and rarely SLE or urticarial vasculitis can have arthritis and urticaria. Purpura, so these are purplish pin-sized rash, or the usually seen in lower extremities, but depends on the disease. The various causes for this are this. When you see purpura, it is definitely small vessel vasculitis. So the causes could be based on the age, gender, duration, and the systemic symptoms, other systemic symptoms patient has. So any condition which can cause inflammation of small vessel can present like this. But the most common causes are hypersensitivity vasculitis, that is due to any drug or a viral infections or sometimes bacterial infections. Also. Hypersensitivity vasculitis. And the next common is the HSP, Henoch-Schönlein purpura. The other vasculitis are relatively rare. They are almost seen in 1 in 1 million. So SLE or Sjogren's, RA also nowadays, RA causing purpura is very rare. It causes only if the disease activity is very high, especially in the after 10 years or 20 years of disease onset. And cryoglobulinemia is one of the classic. This is a classic for few people where hepatitis C infection can cause cryoglobulinemia and then this kind of vasculitis. And papilloscamous lesions. So there will be fine scaling as the lesion progresses. The classic example is psoriasis. But the discoid lupus or SLE having a discoid rash can also present like this. Pustular rash, classically we know any pustule is infection, so most common cause theoretically to say it is gonococcal infection, but we rarely see it. Most common cause of a pustular rash we come across are psoriasis or reactive arthritis like Keratoderma blenurgicum, Behçet's disease, and Sweet syndrome. Annular rash, this kind of rash, it has a ring-like pattern to this, and classic. There are only, in India at least, there are only 3 causes for this kind of rash: subacute lupus, sarcoidosis, or Hansen's. Lyme's we don't see here. So If a patient has arthritis and this kind of range, the diagnosis has to be out of these three. And erythema nodosum, this is one of the classic skin manifestation we see for in our condition in our India, because of tuberculosis. Most patients can come with erythema nodosum and arthritis, especially ankles and MTP joints. And careful evaluation will lead us to a diagnosis. Other causes of erythema nodosum are sarcoidosis, IBD, Behçet's, and sometimes SLE, PAN, Weber-Christian disease. These also can cause panniculitis, not erythema nodosum, other non-erythema nodosum panniculitis. And nail pitting, in case of psoriasis, if you are if there is strong family history and you want to establish a diagnosis, nail examination can help the patient if is having nail pitting, especially this kind of nail pits and other nail changes like say subungual hyperkeratosis or onycholosis. This all help in diagnosing psoriasis. And this is a classical picture for scleroderma. They can come with arthralgias. Here you can see scleroderma faces, narrowing of oral cavity, salt and paper pigmentation, deformities of the hand due to psoriatic, due to scleroderma, skin thickening and the tendon involvement and joint involvement. And the last picture you can see digital pits. So this is a classic picture of scleroderma. This will help in diagnosis. And coming to the other parts of the body, like eyes, if patient has uveitis, we have to think of diseases like spondyloarthritis, psoriatic arthritis, sarcoidosis, Wegener's, Behçet's. This picture here is of Behçet's, where you can see the whitish fluid at the base of the antechamber. That is hypopyon, and the irregular pupil and the hyperemia of the eye. So this is classic for Behçet's. And scleritis we commonly seen in RA or relapsing polychondritis, and anti-ischemic optic neuropathy is classic. We see classically seen in giant cell arthritis, where patient can have polyarthralgias, especially the shoulders and hip joint involvement. And coming to ENT examination, like oral examination of just oral cavity, will many times we can pick up lupus, because the oral ulcers of lupus are painless. And Behçet's can cause painful oral ulcers, and reactive arthritis and Wegener's also can cause sometimes ulcers. And recurrent parotid swelling can be a clue for sarcoidosis or Sjogren syndrome or amyloidosis. And macroglossia is a classic example, is a example for amyloidosis, where these people can come with shoulder arthritis and acromegaly. That itself can cause polyarthralgias. And sinusitis, especially with blood tinge, we have to look for Wegener's granulomatosis. And pinna involvement seen in either relapsive polychondritis or Hansen's. So this is a picture of palatal erosions in SLE on the left side. And on the right side, there's a picture of Sjogren's patient with parotid swellings. So, and this is a picture of the feet. You see lumps of swellings. You can see some whitish hue on the MTP joints. There's a chalk-like lumps under the skin. This is classic for, this is a tophi of gout. And skin nodules. So if you see bilateral nodules like this on the ulna, just below the elbow joint, this is classic for rheumatoid arthritis. The other causes are chronic bilateral ulnar bursitis, which can be seen in either gout, sarcoidosis, or RA also. This picture here is of rheumatoid nodules. And other classic few things for the completion, I will say, like butterfly rash for lupus, heliotrope rash and Gauton's rash for dermatomyositis, keratoderma blennerogicum for Rita's syndrome, livedo reticularis, classically seen in vasculitis and antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, and telangiectasias of face is commonly seen in scleroderma, and also the thickening of the skin in scleroderma and amyloid. And here we can see Haberden nodes and Bouchard nodes. Raynaud's phenomena can be a clue of underlying vasculitis or scleroderma. Thinning of hair is classically seen in hypothyroidism and SLE. And dactylitis, where there is diffuse swelling of the digits or the toes or fingers in spondyloarthritis. And we can, with our, in our history, we also should include some cursory examination, history of involvement of underlying cardiovascular or GI or renal involvement, and CNS involvement also, either for etiology or to assess the severity of the underlying disease. Like for if a patient of SLE presents with arthritis, and you have to ask for any symptoms suggestive of pericarditis, myocarditis, or any symptoms suggestive of mesenteric vasculitis causing abdominal angina, or symptoms suggestive of glomerulonephritis, or symptoms suggestive of seizures or neuropathy. So we have to uh, take a thorough history, especially in patients who have significant systemic complaints. So yeah, systemic complaints, we have to focus on whether patient is having any significant loss of weight, night sweats, fever, severe fatigue and all. Coming to the comorbid conditions, like if you know the patient is a diabetic, then we have to be careful that diabetes can mimic sometimes the hand pain and due to diabetic keratopathy can mimic as rheumatoid arthritis. And classically they present with periarthritis shoulder in patients who have very uncontrolled sugars. And hypothyroidism itself can cause polyarthralgias. CKD patients and gout can cause CKD, and CKD can have high uric acid. And in case of, is there any underlying vasculitis or SLE in a patient of CKD, we have to assess. And malignancies as a paraneoplastic manifestation or immune abnormalities in malignancies, or the treatment also can cause different types of vasculitis and arthritis. So we have to look into this also. In past history, coming to that is with that I will completed the present history, and salient features of examination also included in that. And past history, we have to ask for patient and any preceding infections like sore throat, diarrhea, UTI, uveitis, etc. And family history can sometimes give clues, because there is familial aggravation in certain type of arthritis like RA, psoriasis. If some patient has a psoriasis in family, we can think a similar disease in the subject who has come to you. IBD, ankylosing spondylitis, and SLE, they have some familial aggregation, because at least 30% of most of the disease, there is the genetic predisposition. And the classic example of genetic predisposition is HLA-B27, where all the spondyloarthritis group are classically are associated with HLA-B27, and it can run in families. So physical examination, I think I need not repeat it again because I covered them, but we shouldn't forget to examine from head to toe, looking for signs for any underlying connective tissue disease or vasculitis or a chronic arthritis, like from eyes, ears, skin, nails. So fundus examination for all the vasculitis, and thorough cardiac examination, like in some case of cardiac involvement of underlying SLE or vasculitis, or sometimes Takayasu arthritis, we have to look into it carefully. And coming to examination of the joints, so it is better to know you have to examine the joints starting from the upper extremities and the trunk and lower extremities. We have to, the tender joints we should be handling gently and examining them properly. We have to assess if there is any local rise of temperature, and whether there is a range, the full range of movement is present, whether the joint line is tender. So with history, if you are unable to identify whether the pain is arising from the joint or a enthesitis, clinical examination will further will help us to differentiate these two. And laboratory investigations, and so as I said, history and clinical examination, in most of the times we can come to a possible, we can narrow down most of the differential diagnosis, and we can come to a few differential diagnoses. And laboratory investigations, as in medicine like any other disease, it will be complementary only. Doing all the investigations also, sometimes we may not be able to diagnose, because there will be false negatives and false positives also. So in routine CVP, we can see some abnormalities, like you might be knowing all of this. like anemia of chronic disease can be seen in RA, or anemia due to hemolysis in SLE. And leukopenia classically is seen in SLE and Felty syndrome due to RA. When the number leukocytes are very high, so we have to think about infections or Still's disease, which are most commonly associated with high TLC. Eosinophilia, Churg-Strauss syndrome is a classic example. Thrombocytopenia, especially in SLE and parvoviral viral infections. And acute phase reactants, this is one, ESR and CRP both can differentiate inflammatory from non-inflammatory. If clinically sometimes we are unable to differentiate, this will help us to differentiate them. Some people prefer CRP because of it is very rapidly changing and it rises fast and also comes down fast. For the follow-up, it is a little bit useful, and because it is sometimes and also ESR has many number of variables, but CRP, which it depends on, but CRP has a better accuracy. So some people prefer CRP. And biochemistry investigations also sometimes give a clue for the underlying disease, like elevated liver enzymes can be due to hepatitis of SLE or polyarteritis nodosa sarcoidosis. And sometimes severe myositis can cause elevation of liver enzymes. And elevation of alkaline phosphatase, like it could be a clue for the bone metastasis or Paget's disease or osteomalacia. Urine analysis will give a clue about underlying renal involvement, like glomerulonephritis. Uric acid will help in diagnosing gout. It is important to remember that gout may not have high uric acid in every case. A patient will have normal uric acid also and still have gout. And psoriatic arthritis, patient may have high uric acid and not gout. So psoriatic arthritis is one disease where because of high metabolic rate of skin disease, there is high uric acid and also decreased excretion. So decreased excretion. So you have to be careful to not wrongly label a psoriatic arthritis patient with uric acid and not wrongly exclude gout based on normal uric acid. The CPK, like CPK is a muscle enzyme. We believe elevated CPK will help in diagnosing myositis, either it is polymyositis or dermatomyositis. And serology, I'm not going deep into serology. The most commonly used serology tests in day-to-day practice are these three: rheumatoid factor, ANA, and HLA-B27. So to some rheumatoid factor, we do for chronic symmetrical inflammatory arthritis, either male or female, but females it is more common. So we ask for a rheumatoid factor, especially IgM, which is more specific. And rheumatoid factor has a sensitivity of around 60 to 70%, and also specificity is also around 70%. So 30% of the patient can have a rheumatoid factor negative and still have rheumatoid arthritis. Anti-CCP, sometimes anti-CCP helps us in establishing a diagnosis where there is a false positive rheumatoid factor, especially in pregnancy or tuberculosis. So, and viral infections like hepatitis B, hepatitis C. So, anti-CCP will help in is more specific rheumatoid arthritis. It is around 90% specificity, but the sensitivity is less. We cannot do anti-CCP as a first investigation because its sensitivity is as low as 30%. So you will miss many cases. The next is an anti-nuclear antibody. So ANA is ANA positivity includes antigens of around 100 different types. So ANA itself is not diagnostic for anything, but it will give us a assessment of patient of underlying autoimmune disease, and from there we have to work on. So the screening is done by ANA by immunofluorescence test. So that will give roughly whether to pursue in this direction or not. Coming to HLA-B27 gene analysis to diagnose a spondyloarthritis group of disease. And here it is important that all HLA-B27 positive patients need not have ankylosing spondylitis. And if a patient is negative for HLA-B27, doesn't mean that patient is not having ankylosing spondylitis. And imaging, we have to carefully assess what kind of imaging has to do, X-ray or ultrasound or a CT scan or MRI. Most of the times X-ray gives us a clue for established diseases or a disease which is more than 1 year or 6 months duration. But in early cases, we may need to do ultrasound or MRI also. To summarize, diagnosis is usually based on a detailed history and physical examination. And it is important to differentiate inflammatory from non-inflammatory pains. And the chronology, pattern of joint involvement, disease course, and extraarticular manifestation are often helpful and to narrow down the differential diagnosis. Lab tests help us in confirming or displaying a specific diagnosis, once which we arrived at after a thorough clinical evaluation. With this, I'll conclude. Thank you. If there are any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Varaprasad, for your excellent, very cooked food for the PGs to just digest. Really, it's helping. It will help definitely. Those who have attended, I think, might have definitely enjoyed your presentation. And then it is our classes are mainly directed for the PGs for appearing for the examination. So please do make use of it. If there are any questions or clarification required, I request the participant to address your questions to Dr. Varaprasad. So I request Dr. Varaprasad to please take these questions if there are any.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Any questions? I'm willing to answer. You can ask.
Yeah, if there are no questions, I think you're totally really happy, release the talk. And still, however, Dr. Varaprasad, you can reach him on his phone, or as rightly said, these are all the things that are going to be on website. You can make use of it. So, however, I think to our satisfaction, I mean, may not be to our satisfaction, but at least 15 participants have participated, out of which now only 12 or 13 are remaining. But however, it is not a bad participation. Next visit, next week, we are going to have a talk on the gynecology subject. So we will expect that more number will be attending. Thank you. If there are there is nothing from Bangalore side. Can we call it a day, sir?
Yes, Dr. Balaraju. First of all, thank you very much for being the moderator, and we would like to thank Dr. Rajendra Varaprasad for his time. Okay. So next week, we'll ensure that we will have very good participation, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We will discuss with Venkatam and Dr. or Alex also.
Sure, sir. I will definitely put in a word, sir. And thank you all the participants, and thank you for your time, sir. Good evening, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Varaprasad. Thank you.